It's hard to recognize my life looking back on it. I'd always thought it would be a normal small town dream: wife, 2 kids, dog, and a little house. And I was well on my way to securing that little slice of Americana for myself. But despite being the best contractor in the county, the life I'd built came tumbling down one day when I found out what my wife's extra shifts really were. I'd always been proud of my wife long before the pandemic brought everything to a screeching halt. I known the work that being in the healthcare field was like running a perpetual gauntlet, one covered in someone else's vomit. Melissa spent long hours taking care of elderly dementia patients in a nursing home as a CNA early in her career, coming home in tears at the state of the facility and the lack of help. Then, when she became an RN, she was able to move on to greener pastures. First up, our local emergency room. Despite her small frame and bubbly demeanor, my wife had always been one hell of a daredevil. She loved the heart-bursting adrenaline of roller coasters, and she drove far faster than even I dare to. That made her a great fit for the ER, where you had to know how to handle your adrenaline and still act. Finally, her career landed her on the nursing career version of free parking. She became a flight nurse. For the first few months, her social media was full of posts showing her next to the helicopter in her full gear, looking tiny next to the man who she said was a pilot. She informed me it got a lot of attention from our friends. Social media was never my thing, so I took her at her word. As for me, I'd never done anything much. Melissa was my greatest accomplishment in life. Just like her, I'd headed off to college just after graduation. Unlike her, I'd been more interested in making things than helping people. A career as an engineer was what I'd been pursuing when I met her. Within 2 months, we were engaged and planning our life together, and my studies simply gave way to her own. Her job saved lives. After all, my career path wasn't anything quite so noble, so I fell back on my high school job, working construction in a business owned by a friend's father. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us alive while Melissa finished her education. Even when she was working while at college, it was a pittance. My paycheck and sweat ensured she ate, got to class, and had a roof over her head. She said one day, through tears, as I surprised her with the money, she'd been short to cover her books one semester. I told her, "You will make it through, I promise." Then I kissed her on the forehead. She didn't need to know. I skipped lunch every day for the last 2 months to scrounge the money up. By the time she made it to the big leagues of nursing, life wasn't quite so unsteady. We'd made it through the hard part. Now she was practically raking in the money. For the first time in our lives, it felt like we could relax and enjoy ourselves a little. I started taking more holidays off, hosting more barbecues for our friends, even went to an NFL game once or twice. And her, girls' night out, girls' night in, spa days, she was gorgeous. With as much time and cash as she spent at the salon and the mall, you'd hope so. But why should I care? She was bringing home the dough, and I was reaping the rewards. There was a downside, though. I began to feel lonely. With all of her time at work and all of the time she spent focusing on herself, she had hardly any time left for me. Of course, she deserved pampering. After all of those hours being selfless, helping her patients in every place she worked, but it didn't make the feeling any better. I loved my wife and wanted her desperately every minute of every day. And I couldn't seem to get her to sit still long enough to let me show her how much I adored her. Finally, I knew what needed to be done, knew exactly what would really catch her eye. Being young and paying for our own wedding, a honeymoon hadn't been a possibility. It had saddened Melissa to no end, and no groom likes to see his bride looking down on her wedding day. So, I made a promise to her that one day I'd take her wherever she wanted to go in the entire world. Whatever she wanted, I'd make it happen. And I had always intended to keep that promise. For our 5th anniversary, I kept that promise. I'm not too manly to say the week wasn't magical. Spending 7 days with the most beautiful woman in the world, seeing her body bronze in the sun, and become dewy against the sheets. It's something anyone would be over the, and she was as happy about it as I was. The glow in her eyes told the whole story. It felt like we were brought out of stasis. We'd entered upon saying, I do, and that we were newlyweds all over again. There was no getting enough of each other. We made love for hours, every night, every day. Even today, I don't think the memory of that vacation will ever leave me. Now, much more bitter than before. It's still something I'd enjoyed so long. I know it would never leave me. When we got home, I carried my wife, still as beautiful as the day I married her, over the threshold. It was the first time I'd felt good enough about myself as a husband to do so. How could things have gone so badly wrong? The first thing that dented this haven we created was the while other couples were stuck at home together, whether fighting or, well, I was stuck at home by myself. Melissa seemed to be working constantly. When she came home, she'd have indentures from the PPA on her skin. I tried to kiss her, rub the marks to make the pain from them go away, but she'd usually push me aside. I understood. I really did. She was working an exhausting schedule and trying to fight a battle against an enemy that she couldn't even see. What kind of jackass husband would put sex above something like that? So, I focused my love on being accepting of her and of doing my best to support her in any way I could. She'd come home to a hot meal and a strong drink. No matter what time it was, when she returned, whatever she wanted, I had it before she could get the sentence out. Her feet hurt. No worries, babe. I'll carry you to the tub so you can soak. And I didn't ask anything in return. Showing love to healthcare workers wasn't just a social movement to me. It was something I was throwing myself into with the woman I loved as the recipient. But even as things seemed to be slowing down, she started staying away more and more. I don't want you to catch COVID, she told me one day. After she spent a full week in a hotel room near her workplace, your family's health history isn't great. Your grandma's got emphysema, and you're the only one that can go out and about without possibly spreading it. She promised me things will be back to normal, and we will possibly go away again. I wouldn't realize until hours later that neither of us had said I love you, not once in the entire conversation. It made me feel like a failure of a husband. After all, she was my wife, my life, and I loved her dearly. But something inside me didn't sit right. That night, I hardly slept, even as I tried to drown that feeling in my gut in cheap beer. Not long after that hit, I got another one. I lost my job. The owner felt horrible as he'd known me since I was a kid. We're letting everyone go for now, he said, everyone but me and the family. It's all I can afford. And I don't know how much longer that'll last. As soon as everything's back to normal, I will hire you again. And if you find some other job in between and you don't want to leave it, you will get no hard feelings from me. If you come back, I'll make it up to you. I'll give you a promotion and a raise. But for now, I gotta let you go. I took my marching papers along with a glowing reference and a promise not to fight unemployment and came home early to an empty house and an absent wife. This was the time when the loneliness was the worst. I called and called, trying to get a hold of her somehow, if for nothing but our budget. She had to know that I just lost the only job I'd ever had and the income that had helped her rise to where she was today. The phone would ring and ring and ring, but I never got an answer. I must have texted her dozens of times. Nothing. But I assumed she was busy with work, and there was nothing more noble than working extra shifts at a hospital during a pandemic. Finally, 2 days after getting the axe, she answered. The sympathy I expected, it was clear I wouldn't find it with her. Why? How could you let this happen? She said, sounding angrier than I'd ever heard her before. She berated me, told me that she had no intention of supporting a spouse who didn't work. It was an ugly side I've never seen of her before. This was North Carolina, and we'd both gotten a heaping dose of old-fashioned values just from living in the place, but I'd always thought of her as my partner in life. And my partner had just left me feeling alone, uncared for, and disgusted. After that, the next weeks were a blur. I'm not proud to admit that I spent most of the time drunk. Doing anything else felt like moving a mountain. I just wanted to wilt, to wallow in the sorrow that my happy life and marriage had become. Melissa and I didn't talk much. I only saw her once a week, sometimes less. We slept together once. She did seem nicer, more caring, even apologizing for her outburst, but that feeling in the pit of my stomach was back and it wasn't leaving. During one of our phone calls when she answered, I could have sworn I heard a man's voice. It was low, a bit gruff, and I couldn't make out what he'd been cut off from saying. The tone, though, unmistakable. Asking Melissa about it made her laugh. She said, "You just heard the TV. I'm catching up on some shows. I haven't had a chance to watch in a while." Then I asked, "Why did it stop?" "Because I paused it to talk to you." She stopped for a moment. "What are you trying to say?" Suddenly feeling foolish, I didn't tell the truth. I brushed the question off and tried to talk to her as though nothing was wrong. Something was wrong, though. Very wrong. I'd hear her answer the phone out of breath. It would be because she just hurried back to the hotel to rest her feet. But never again did I hear that voice over the phone, at least. One day, when I had run out of beer to drink and pity to consume me, I decided something had to change. I knew my wife was off work. Now COVID be damned. I was going to pick up flowers, put on something that wasn't 3 days worn. And I was going to go see my wife. She'll be so surprised. I thought I had no idea how right that would be and how wrong at the same time. I had always known where she was staying while she didn't like me to visit and had told me of her own accord. I put my foot down. I was going to know where my wife was spending her nights. If only so I know where she was. If something happened, they were across town, close to the hospital she worked out of. It's why she said she had chosen them. At the front desk, I stopped. A woman was working there, red-headed, a bit slim, but with green eyes that struck me for a moment, feeling a moment of disgust with myself. I smiled in a friendly way. It took some smooth talking, but I got a key card for her room. Her booking with my credit card helped with that. That was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want her to have the chance to turn me away. Here I was dressed in my Sunday best and carrying a bouquet of lilies, her favorite flower, and a bottle of rose wine, her favorite drink. I was ready for a special night. I walked into a nightmare. Upon opening the door, I didn't really comprehend what it was at first. The lights were on, and I saw the bed unmade. Then I saw skin. Then I saw red. I was stunned, which is lucky, I suppose. Otherwise, I might be in prison now, but it was clear what was happening. My wife, my Melissa, being intimate with another man, I felt ill. I felt something beyond anger. By now she noticed me. She was shrieking, yelling about something, then sobbing. The man was putting clothes on. It was such a blur. Somehow I ended up in the foyer of the hotel, sobbing, heartbroken, and barely conscious with grief over my lost marriage. It was the receptionist that had given me the key that finally helped. A hand was rubbing my back. That contact had more intimacy than anything Melissa had given me in months. My thoughts began to cool. I began to calm down. "You seem like a good man," she was saying. "You don't deserve someone like her. Don't let her do this to you. It's going to be all right." I asked her what she meant, and the truth came out. My wife hadn't been working so many extra shifts. In fact, she'd worked little more than I had. A steady 40-hour work week. All that time, she had been sleeping with other men. The receptionist hadn't kept careful track, but knew it was more than one. I didn't go home. I went to my friend's house, the the one whose father had given me my job. He drank with me and let me crash on his couch until I felt like coming home. That took 2 days. There was one stop made between his house and mine. As it turned out, she was there trying to explain, wanting to save our marriage after putting nothing towards it, then shattering it with her infidelity. I didn't want that. How could I? I'd never see her as my Melissa again. She couldn't be my wife anymore. Not after what I'd seen, but I decided to get the truth out of her, and I could use this to do it. Tell me, I said, my voice so grave, I could hardly recognize it. Tell me how many, and don't lie and say that was the only one. Eyes watery. She looked down, ashamed, I supposed, at her behavior. Oddly, I found that I didn't care about it. I was completely detached. 3. She told me the whole story, skipping no details. At every point in her career, she found somebody to screw behind my back while I was slaving away in the summer sun. She was studying with the fellow nursing student while in school. She didn't pull extra shifts at the nursing home. A cook there had caught her eye. There was nobody after our trip. She said fervently, nobody, just you until the man she'd been caught with, the pilot she worked with. Of course. Suddenly, she was wiping her face. Please, please forgive me. I'm so sorry, she repeated in stuttering litany. Look, I got you something. It's tickets for that Hawaii vacation. And I interrupted her. I got you something too. A look of fear came over her face. Melissa didn't answer. The only reply I had was handing out a packet of divorce papers. The divorce wasn't terribly lengthy, for about a month or so. It seemed like Melissa was going to push to stay together. I'd heard that her pilot had gotten into trouble with his own wife for sleeping with mine. She decided to stay, but he was to have nothing with Melissa, with the other lovers long in the rear view mirror that left her alone as I'd been. I wasn't alone anymore. I was living my life and getting on with it. Work hadn't hired me back, but I'd been building my reputation as a contractor. The pay was small as of now, but quickly growing. My buddy didn't mind me staying in his garage apartment until I found something a bit better. Best of all, I'd gotten a pretty redhead's number from the hotel. Her name is Jean. We've had dinner 3 times now. I've never had to call her back more than twice. As for Melissa, there's something we both learned about our state law. When adultery is the cause of the divorce, it can be used to determine certain aspects of the split. Things like alimony. The judge was horrified by Melissa's behavior and took into account everything I'd done to help her and how my now ex had betrayed me. That account turned out to mean a rather hefty sum of alimony every month for a very, very long time. The first night after the divorce was complete, Jean and I made love. After all, I'm not a cheater, and she's not looking for any. Most folks call me Freddie. I am 36 years old, and for the last 17 years, I have worked in the same paint and body shop owned by the man that taught me how to do this job. I won't get into much detail, but my shop does mostly high-end work. If we have a bay open and you bring in a car that has been involved in a crash, we will accept it. Most of the time, the way our shop is set up though, we lose money on those types of jobs. To give you an idea, I just finished with a car worth over $200,000. So, while not attempting to brag, I am doing okay. I drive an old 1975 Chevy C10 pickup I restored. My story is not about my job. It is about my now ex-wife, Julia. I was born in a small town in eastern North Carolina to a now retired Marine and a school teacher. I spent almost all my early years across the world. My folks settled down in Maryland, and I live and work about 2 hours away. Julia was in my senior class when we were in California, and she was the daughter of an insurance salesman and an executive assistant to a local politician. They did well. Julia was born in California. Her father wanted me to go to college and come to work for him in his business. I knew years before this is what I wanted to do. Camp Pendleton was my dad's last duty station before his retirement. He retired about 4 months after I graduated from high school. I remember having dinner at Julia's home, and her father really was on to me to go to college. I knew my father was going to retire soon and was going to Maryland. I knew there was nothing for me in California. So over the next few weeks, I broke up with Julia. I then packed up and moved with my folks to Maryland with both of my baby sisters. When we got to Maryland, I started working in a local Walmart doing overnight stocking and was miserable. I then decided to start taking some classes at a nearby trade school in paint and bodywork. It was there that I met my now boss. He made me an offer. I quit that program and moved to where his shop was. He then taught me this trade. I had a small room in an overhead loft, and while it was not a luxury apartment, it met my needs. Then on the weekends, I went back to Maryland. About 2 years later, I ran into Julia sitting in a local restaurant and was surprised to see her. I must admit, she and I had been exchanging emails over those years. I never thought she would leave California. She somehow found a job and shared an apartment with several other girls. When I look back at this, I know I missed some red flags. Julia never told me what she was going to do. I was taking things slow with Julia because my boss wanted 100% of my mind on that job. I remember I was getting a Porsche ready for painting when my boss called me into his office. I had a phone call. It was Julia's father. He was furious because Julia had left California and was chasing after me. I took several minutes of abuse from him before my boss got on the other line and told him to shut up, and both of us hung up the phones. After this happened, my boss told me to stay away from Julia. My boss is married to a great lady who can bake and brings baked goods to the shop. He had a bad marriage that was so bad, he almost did not get married again. He did, but his wife now is good people. I wished I had listened to him. I had been saving my money, and over the years I had been working, I got several raises. I was saving most of my pay. I then decided to get an apartment in the same city where my shop was. I also asked Julia to marry me and move in with me. She did. We got married, and Julia started the application process with a large domestic airline to become a flight attendant. She got finished and started flying. Within 6 months, with her pay as well as mine, we did okay. In fact, we moved to a nicer apartment. All was well. Julia sometimes works flights back home and would visit her folks. Well, that was what I first thought. When you start to think about all the classic red flags, Julia was not throwing any that I caught. My life started to come undone one day when I needed to talk to Julia. She was working a flight to LAX, Los Angeles, and was going to rent a car and drive to see her parents. At that time, they lived almost halfway between Los Angeles and San Diego. By this time, Julia had been on the ground almost 6 hours. I called my in-laws and asked to speak to her. Her mom answered, and I noticed her voice changed after I asked to talk to her daughter. At first, she said Julia was not there, but then a few seconds later, said she was not there at that time and would have her return my call when she got back home. Julia had a cell phone. The problem is it was not what we all use today. It was a flip phone. And to be honest, the service was not all that great. So I tried the number. I got her voice greeting and left a message. I went to bed that night angry. Julia had a 2-day layover, and I kept expecting her to call me on my job. She never did. So I called back to her folks' home and said I had not heard anything. Her mom said she was not there at the moment, but would have her call me. Something inside me snapped. I told her mom to tell Julia she had exactly 1 hour to call me or her things will be out in the front of our apartment building. I screamed 1 hour and hung up. The only thing I can figure out is her mom knew where she was and called her. It took about 15 minutes and she called the shop. I asked my boss to tell her. I now did not want to speak to her and was going to be moving back to the old loft apartment. I used that evening to pack up most of my belongings into storage, and I moved back into that loft. That next day, Julia showed up at the shop. When she started in, I said both her and her mom are liars and I want nothing more to do with either of them. My boss asked her to leave. Later, he gave me a piece of paper with his old attorney's information on it. He just smiled and said, "Freddie, keep it handy. Work on the marriage, but if it can't be saved, call him." I should also add several days before Julia left for California was the last time we had sex. This fact will become important later. That next day was a Saturday. So I went back to the apartment and Julia made some breakfast and we talked. I asked her, "Where were you at? And don't tell me you were with your folks." Julia cried some as she told me she missed home and some of her friends there. She had met up with some and they spent time on the beach. Julia went on to say she was sorry. She asked me to come back home. I asked her, "Were you with Gail?" She said, "Yes, I was." I said, "Okay, do not leave my sight. Give me her phone number. I want to call her." All the color had left Julia's face. She also refused to give me her number. I then went into the bedroom and got the last of my things. I told Julia there were about 5 months left on the lease. I would pay my part, but would not sign another one. You have that long to decide what you want to do. I also told her I want to make this separation formal and plan to hire an attorney to do so. By this time, Julia was begging me to call Gail. I figured Gail would find a way to cover for her. So I knew that was a dead end. Julia grabbed me as I was attempting to leave the apartment. I was raised to never hit a woman. I knew my dad would disown me if I did. Still, I was so angry at Julia by that time, I told her as plainly as I could, "If you don't let me go, I will break your jaw." She did and fell to the floor crying. By that time, I had all my things out of the apartment that I wanted. Later, I was in Maryland and told my folks what was happening. My dad asked me to come take a walk with him. My dad was a retired Marine gunny sergeant, tough as nails. He did not put up with any BS and told me as much as we walked. I told him my story and he played devil's advocate and asked me questions. I guess we were out walking for close to an hour. As we walked back into the yard, he says, "Something is not right with Julia. I hate to see your marriage end, but I do support your decision." And he said he was in a position to come up with a few grand to hire a private investigator and an attorney. I took him up on that offer. I did not hire a private investigator, but I did hire a local attorney and simply was asking for a no-fault divorce. Julia refused to hire an attorney and would not sign the papers. We had no children and no property. There was nothing to fight over. Julia made more than I did at that time. I was just wanting out. I lost what I thought was my love for Julia. I did not have a smoking gun, but inside I knew something was off. Julia kept telling my attorney she wanted to get marriage counseling. I said no. So after 4 months went by, I told my attorney to file for a no-fault divorce. It took about another 2 months to get a hearing date. All the while I am doing everything I can do to get Julia to sign the papers. I lost track of the last day I physically saw Julia before that hearing. All I can say is when she entered that courthouse, she was showing a baby bump. Remember, it has been over 6 months since we last slept together. Julia told me she was 5 months along. I'm not a college graduate like her father, but I do know according to the math, there was no way that child was mine. Still, at the hearing, Julia told the judge I was the only man she had ever been with. The judge continued the case after my attorney said I disputed parentage. This was after both of us agreed to do so. The judge did order a paternity DNA test to be done. I saw the look on Julia's face as she walked out. By this time, the apartment lease was over and Julia moved back to California. She had her daughter, and by the time of the new hearing, the DNA test results were back. The judge granted the divorce and did not award any support. I understand Julia did add my name to her daughter's birth certificate, but later California removed it. Several years passed. By this time, I was making a percentage of the cars I worked on. I was making a bit over $115,000 a year. It was about this time I found that old Chevy C10 I rebuilt. I spent hours each night working on it. One day, Julia drove up in the yard and wanted to speak to me. She was still in her flight attendant uniform and had worked a flight into one of the airports into DC. She wanted to show me some photos of her daughter. I said I was not interested in seeing photos of a child that was not mine. Julia's eyes went sad. She then offered to buy my lunch. I again refused. Freddie, I just want to talk. I told her there was nothing to talk about. That baby is not mine. You were cheating on me. So, what else was there to talk about? Why maybe? Julia, I don't want to know why. I just want you out of my life. Julia rolled up the window of her rented car and drove off. Over the next 4 or 5 years, Julia continued to make contact, seeking to speak to me. Then finally, she came by with that daughter and a mixed-race boy that looked to be about 3 maybe. I walked out and Julia got out of the car and we spoke. I don't know why, but I guess Julia basically wore me down. She told me that day in California, she was in fact meeting her AP and her mom didn't know about it. In fact, it was her mother that introduced him to each other. He was some kind of pretty boy that had rich parents. They did the deed and she felt bad afterwards. She had no idea I would attempt to call her parents. I told her, Julia, at that time, you were my wife. I needed to contact you about a purchase I was thinking we needed to make. After 2 days, I just snapped. Then I pointed to the boy and said, I guess his dad is another pretty boy. Julia said, no, his dad is one of the pilots at her airline that she is living with. By this time, my boss had figured out who it was and had called the police. A cop drove up behind Julia's car and told her that she was being trespassed, and if she came back on the property, would be arrested. Julia wanted to hug me. I looked at her and said, no. Julia, I might catch something. Julia was crying when she got into her car. Her last words to me were, Freddie, I will always love you. I turned and walked back into the shop. I went to the office and poured a cup of coffee. I then walked back into the shop, and as I sipped on the coffee, started thinking about that poor simp she is living with, how he will one day come to regret having a child. Claire grew up in a family of dentists, and from a young age, she did not need anything. Her parents, professionals in their field, have always put a priority on good treatment of patients, high quality of work, and affordable prices. That is why they decided to open their own dental clinic. Their patient flow only increased year by year and brought in a considerable income. By the time Claire was born, her family could afford to live in splendid conditions of living, travel to expensive resorts, buy fashionable clothes and shoes. When it came to the question of enrolling in university, Claire's parents, as it often happens in doctors' families, were confident that their daughter would follow in their footsteps, but the girl had other plans. Claire easily got into the best law school in the country and returned home with a law degree. She found a job as an intern at a high-profile law firm and soon, showing good character, was accepted on the staff. A year was enough for her to gain not only experience, but also a name. Claire was glad she did not make a mistake in her choice of profession. Her clients were often ordinary, not wealthy people who were victims of coincidence, and she always tried to do everything to restore justice. And after one of the trials, where Claire proved that her client was not guilty of the accident, she met with Logan. He came to support his friend, who had been accused of causing the accident, and after the trial, he came over to thank her. He looked at the girl so admiringly that she immediately believed in the sincerity of his words. Thus began their romance. Logan turned out to be a clever and kind man, but he immediately told her that he was not rich, lived with his mother, with a disability, and 2 sisters who were still in school. He had studied programming, but dropped out to support his family. He understood he was not a good match for Claire, and would have put up with her refusal, but Claire felt that he was the only one she needed in her life. Soon, she insisted that Logan meet her parents. He did not hide his fears about it, as he knew that they would not be pleased with him. But Claire almost dragged him by force to dinner at her parents' house. And, to Logan's great surprise, the evening passed in a warm and friendly atmosphere, and Claire's parents immediately accepted him as their own son. Shortly thereafter, Claire suggested that Logan move in with her. She was a little afraid that everyday life would ruin their relationship, but things got even better because Logan carefully took care of Claire. "Are you going to get married?" Claire's father asked Logan once. "Yes, as soon as I can get back on my feet and provide for us completely. So far, my salary only suffices for living expenses," replied Logan. "You know, Logan," the mother stepped in, "when Claire's father and I got married, we didn't even have enough money for food. So, it's not an argument," she added, putting an end to the discussion. Soon, Logan and Claire got married. Claire knew that Logan was very nervous because almost all the wedding costs were paid by her parents. He was very uncomfortable. But Claire's father made it clear that they loved their daughter just as much as he did, so the wedding had to be a wonderful event. Logan really wanted to be the main breadwinner in the family, and Claire was always amazed at this male character trait in him. The man who grew up without a father, surrounded by women, behaved like a true man, and Claire appreciated it very much. She also became very close to Logan's mother and sisters, and even secretly helped them to buy the girls' clothes, shoes, and other gifts. They refused at first, but Claire managed to talk them out of it. Of course, Logan was aware of everything, but his sisters were so happy that he had to put up with it. The only thing that Claire failed at was pleasing Logan's mother. "No need, honey. Don't buy me anything, you already do a lot for us," she used to say to Claire. "You just know that Logan loves you very much and cherishes you." Logan was working more and more, but he realized that he was far away from Claire's salary. Claire constantly told him that money was not essential because she was happy with him and they had enough to live on. But Logan could not calm down, and he continued to come home late from work and even sometimes worked on weekends. One day, Logan told Claire about the idea of his own business. She found it reasonable, but it took a long time to talk him out of taking a bank loan. And after all, he agreed to borrow money from her parents, who happily supported her son-in-law and gave him the full amount right away. Logan fully immersed himself in the new business, worked hard, but after 2 months it turned out that his assistants had just deceived him in the most cowardly way, taking advantage of his inexperience and trustfulness. Logan became bankrupt. He had long been unable to recover from the failure, and then he returned to various part-time jobs. The man barely spoke to Claire, only firmly hugged her in the evenings as if to relieve himself. Upon learning of what had happened, Claire's parents supported their son-in-law, advising him to stop and keep looking for other business options and promising to provide the necessary help. And Logan was always in search and working to the point of exhaustion. He was so tired that Claire sometimes feared for his health. His search for a job, his guilt over Claire for not giving her the kind of life she deserved, was eating the man up. Now the couple rarely talked, even more rarely went out, neither to visit friends, nor to the theater, or to the cinema. Claire did not even start talking about it. She tried to make sure that Logan at least got a good night's sleep and ate some food. The man was always pale, looked tired, and lost even more weight. Even Claire's parents had noticed this, and her mother advised him to have an examination, but Logan categorically refused. He assured her that everything was fine, and as soon as his new business was up and running, everything would be back to normal. Claire's father offered that his son-in-law to take the money for the development, but this time Logan flatly refused, referring to the fact that he had not returned the previous debt. When Logan and Claire remained alone, Logan spoke to his wife for the first time in a high-pitched tone. "That's it. I will not take any more money from your parents. I no longer have any respect for myself, and I feel that you, Claire, despise me," he said so sharply that Claire shuddered. From that day on, he completely isolated himself from her. He only came home for the night and even stopped visiting his mother and sisters. They, like Claire, did not understand what was wrong, but they also began to suspect that something was going on with Logan, and it was not because of the failures in business. Claire could not allow the idea that her husband had another woman because there was no more honest and decent man in the world. Claire's head was constantly bursting with all sorts of assumptions, especially when her husband increasingly secluded himself in another room to talk on the phone. Worries about her husband occupied Claire so much that it began to reflect negatively on her work. Once, she almost lost a case, and only at the last moment was able to pull herself together and bring the line of defense to the winning end. That was the last straw. Claire left the courtroom and headed straight home. When she opened the door, she immediately realized that her husband was home and talking to someone on the phone. She unwittingly overheard Logan refusing some kind of surgery. "Thank you for everything you have done for me, but I don't have opportunity for this right now." Logan said farewell. Claire, realizing that something bad had happened to her husband, she burst into the room and desperately demanded him to tell her the whole truth. But she had not expected how cruel this truth would turn out to be. Immediately after his first unsuccessful attempt at business, Logan felt a severe headache. Without telling his wife or his mother and sisters, he went to the hospital, where he heard that he had a brain tumor. The doctor prescribed a supportive treatment for Logan, but told him that he needed an expensive operation and that the insurance would not cover it in full. Logan was aware of what would happen if he would not have surgery to remove the tumor, but he continued to take pills and postpone the surgery because he first wanted to establish a new business, which he could bequeath to his wife and his mother with his sisters in case of a bad outcome. And now the doctor said that they cannot wait any longer. Claire was shaking with sobs, but suddenly she stood up sharply and shouted through her tears, "Get dressed." Immediately, Logan obediently got dressed, ready to do anything to get Claire to stop crying. Not half an hour later, Logan was telling Claire's parents the whole story all over again. The father came to his senses first. "Logan, tell me the truth. Why did you marry our daughter? To make her a widow? Great plan, and you know what? You're just a coward. You give up without a fight. All you have in mind is money. Yes, you didn't earn it right away, but why suffer and agonize over it? Why did you see our help as humiliation? Do you think leaving the woman you love as a widow is something to be proud of?" "All right, Ben, stop it." Claire's mother interrupted him and turned to Logan. "We're going to the hospital right now and no objections," she said menacingly. Seeing how determined her mother was, Claire was again convinced of how dear Logan was to them. But he kept quiet for a moment and then said that it was late and there was no need to go anywhere. "No." Claire went over to her husband and hugged him tightly. "I have heard the doctors say it wasn't too late. All right, let's go, quick," the father sharply commanded. All the way, Claire hugged her husband and whispered to him how much she loved and believed in him. She tried to convince him that she was ready to support him in whatever he was doing because she knew how important it was to him. But no amount of money would replace her beloved man if he would suddenly be gone. From then on, there was the most difficult 4 months for everyone. Surgery after surgery, a week in the intensive care unit, an unquenchable hope in the eyes of the whole family. And soon the day came when the doctor received the results of the tests and finally pleased his patient. "Well, Logan, let's say goodbye. It's your time to go home." Logan did not immediately grasp the meaning of the doctor's words, and when he heard Claire's happy exclamation, he felt tears of joy fill his eyes. But he was not ashamed of that. He felt ashamed for not believing in himself the way Claire had believed in him, for hiding his pain and weakness from her. If he had confessed right away, everything would have gone much easier for everyone. And then Logan gave himself a firm word that from now on, there would always be trust in their relationship and he would never make her cry and worry again. Happy endings happen not only in fairy tales. There were still many difficult moments in Claire and Logan's life, but there was much more happiness in it. Logan finally set up his business, and it allowed him to send his mother abroad for medical treatment and give his sisters an excellent education. And 3 years later, when the couple had a little daughter who looked so much like Claire, they became truly happy and nothing could. My 23 female dad cheated on his wife with my mom, but they stayed together. My mom died when I was a few months old, and my stepmom didn't want me in her house, so I was raised by my grandparents, who passed away 2 years ago. My dad died before them, so everything was willed to me and my half-brother, 28. I inherited their house, almost everything in it, and all of my grandma's jewelry, which is worth about $750,000. I was also the sole beneficiary of their life insurance, $300,000. My brother got a few heirlooms and some money, but it was far less than what I got because he inherited a lot from our dad, while I pretty much got nothing. At the time, he didn't have a problem with it. He's getting married soon, and I was talking to his fiancée, who told me my brother told her that our grandma wanted his future wife to get married wearing the jewelry she wore at her wedding. I have no idea why he told her this. He was not close to our grandma at all. She definitely did not promise him her wedding jewelry. I was actually planning on wearing it to my wedding and talked to my grandma about that. I told my sister-in-law that I couldn't give her the jewelry. She can borrow it for her wedding, but she has to return it because I plan to wear it to my wedding too. She told me she didn't want her sister-in-law to wear the same jewelry as her. I told her I couldn't give her the jewelry and that if my grandma wanted my brother's wife to have it, she would have willed it to him. I thought that was the end of it, but it was not. My brother called me that night and told me that his fiancée was crying because of me, and he deserved to have something from our grandma because I inherited a lot more than him. I reminded him that I grew up with my grandparents and had a much closer relationship with them. He cussed me out and said I tricked them into leaving me most of their money. That isn't true. They raised me since I was a few months old. I went to a local university instead of my dream school so I could stay home and care for them in their final years so they had a better relationship with me. I told him that his fiancée could borrow the jewelry if she really wanted to wear it to her wedding, but I couldn't give it to her. His mom called me the next day and called me all sorts of nasty things for depriving my brother of something my grandma promised to give him. If my grandma had promised him that, I would have given him the jewelry, but I know she didn't, so I'm not giving it to him. Edit. All the jewelry's insured, except a few small pieces I wear regularly are in a safe deposit box at the bank. The jewelry in question is a necklace and earrings. I might give her something else if they don't shut up. Not the idiot, and at this point, don't even let your fiancé borrow the jewelry, because I highly doubt you'd get it back without getting the police involved. Tell her your grandparents wanted you to have it, so you'll use it since she doesn't want you both to wear the same jewelry. Inform her that your brother got a lot inherited to him from your father. He can use some of that money to get her a nice set of jewelry. These people plan to keep the jewelry and probably sell it. That's the only thing explaining their responses. Or buy an expensive-looking but fake jewelry set, saying it's from the collection, and let her borrow it. Pretend to have a great fake reservation, then cackle as she flaunts it. She'll probably get it appraised within a month, but she's not planning to return them. Can you imagine how embarrassed and angry she'll be? If she plans to return them, she will never know and will feel beautiful. I do see your point. That would be hilarious. I would laugh even more when she decided to keep it then laugh so much more when they try to sell it and realize it's fake. And please, don't give them a smaller item if they don't shut up. All that teaches them is that boundary stomping, whining, and sending their flying monkeys at you will at least give them something. That's a dangerous precedent to set with these two. Your stepbrother's very persistent and entitled. Your grandmother wanted you to have it. My teen female mom got pregnant young, and she has me and my brothers, 18 male and nearly adult male. My mom and the person I know as my dad started dating while she was pregnant with me. My whole life I was told he was my father, and his name is on my original birth certificate. My bio mom and dad were unfit parents, and it resulted in us being taken away by CPS. They eventually got their parental rights taken away. We were later adopted by a different family, and they are who we see as our mom and dad. A year ago, we discovered that the man we thought was our bio dad is in fact bio dad to middle brother, and our bio dad is a person we had never met. Our bio dad reached out to us, and while we were hesitant at first, our parents suggested we at least just say hi back. We did, and eventually we ended up meeting bio dad and later his family. Through this, we learned that bio dad knew that our mom was pregnant, but chose not to be involved and wanted nothing to do with us, as he wasn't ready to have children. Present day, bio dad is married, and he and his wife are struggling to have kids, so after several months of slowly gaining our family's trust, bio dad suggested to our parents that they have unofficial custody with him, where we'd spend some weekends, holidays, summers, etc., and such with him and his wife. My parents said that they're not willing to give up weekends and holidays, etc., and don't want to have any unofficial agreement either. This annoyed my bio dad, and he started throwing a dad card around, saying that he's our father, and therefore, he has the right to have us around as much as he wants, and that his suggestion was him trying to be reasonable. He then came to us, saying he wanted us to be a family again, and they were keeping us from him, etc., and just trash-talking my parents a lot. I guess he was trying to get us to side with him, but this just made us start to not like him. The next few times we met, he just kept on trash-talking our parents, and I told him that he had multiple chances to be a parent, but chose not to. He doesn't get to be a parent when it's now convenient for him, and had he stepped up earlier, he wouldn't be in this situation. I also said that if he kept trash-talking our parents, we'd stop talking to him. Now we've stopped talking. Our bio dad then took to social media, telling any and everybody that my parents are evil and keeping him from the only kids he might ever have, and calling us kids brainwashed, dumb, and ungrateful. Since then, we've had his family and friends contact us, saying we should apologize to bio dad and rethink our decisions. Others blame our parents, saying that one day we'll snap out of our parents' brainwashing and regret cutting our bio dad off. Some took it even as far as to say we're ungrateful, petty, and all kinds of mean things. Am I the idiot for telling my dad it's his fault he's in this situation? Not the idiot. This is ridiculous. How can a perfect stranger enter your life as a nearly legal adult and start claiming parental rights? If he cared, he would have been present in your younger years. You and your siblings owe him nothing. As far as you're concerned, he's just a donor. You have actual parents now, even though you're not biologically related. I agree. I'm a parent, and I'm horrified at how bio dad is acting, especially with these horrible social media posts. I've replied to his friends, asking what OP should be grateful for. The fact that our bio dad knew about his children and abandoned them to CPS for the first 17 years of their lives, only to show up when they're adults and expect someone to love him. OP, you're absolutely correct. He had multiple chances to be a parent and chose not to. He doesn't get to be a parent when it's now convenient for him. If his family and friends keep harassing you, respond with that and block them. You had a great adoptive mom and dad who really care about you and aren't using you to soothe a childless wife. I suspect if bio dad's wife has a kid, you'll get dropped again. Never have contact with him again. His behavior is off the rails, mean and ridiculous. Move on with no regrets. 27 female, go out with my sister, Lily, 35, once every 2 or 3 months for lunch. That is both because she has 3 kids, female pretween, male kindergartner, and female toddler, and barely has time, and because I have very few days to myself, thanks to my residency. Throughout this whole lunch, she's complained nonstop about how hard it is to have kids and be a mom for the past few years, nonstop. She talks about kids 100% of the time and complains. I was extra tired during our last lunch, and I lashed out at her, saying that I don't remember anyone forcing her to have kids, and now that she has them, she should be a big girl and deal with the consequences of her actions and decisions. She got super mad and called me a judgmental idiot who knew nothing about parenthood. I was like, exactly. I'm taking one of the most challenging paths a person can take in my career, and I've never complained, not even a word, because I chose it myself. She told me I was a horrible sister and an even worse aunt, and she said she wanted nothing to do with an idiot like me. Am I the idiot? Edit. She does have a husband. She's a stay-at-home mom. Her husband has some financial struggles. Other kids were planned, informed choices she made. She's naturally a person who finds things to complain about, even when there genuinely isn't anything that bothers her. Not the idiot. You can only take so much from a person. Being so utterly negative like that sucks the life out of folks. The conversation sounds exhausting and one-sided. That being said, she's right about it being hard. I'm not a mom, but from seeing friends and family, it's lonely for them to get screamed at and puked on. It was her choice, as was your choice. Neither should be minimalized or marginalized for their challenges. Yeah, I think it's the sucks the life out of folks part. I had a chronically depressed friend that kept getting worse. I would do anything in my power to uplift her when we were together. A few friends even told me she seemed uplifted around me. I truly loved her as a friend. Years went by, and she got increasingly negative, and it drained me. I had to give up the relationship. I still miss her, but I just can't do it. Everyone's the idiot here. People complain about the things happening in their lives. You probably complain about things in your life that are stressful. Your sister complains about her kids because they're stressful. It's literally what people do. Telling people they can't complain because they made their choice. So, therefore, they lost the right to complain, and it has to be all rainbows and butterflies is absurd. However, you can ask to change the subject or just sympathize. Also, don't compare your choices with your sister's. You're different people with different goals. Stop competing for whose life is harder. Based on your logic, you chose to have lunch with your sister. So, therefore, you can't complain about that experience. My boyfriend got very skinny in the last few weeks. I feel he lost at least 10 kilograms, 22 pounds. I saw him shirtless yesterday and was kind of shocked at how much weight and muscle he lost. I still think he's beautiful, but I'm worried about his health if it continues like that. Yesterday, I told him that I noticed how much weight he had lost and that he should start eating more before he gets sick. I said it's not a serious tone at all though, just chill. He got kind of offended and told me to mind my own business. He was very dismissive and kind of rolled his eyes at me, which made me sad. I apologized and I told him I was just worried about him. And then he said, "Do you want me to call you a fatty and eat less?" Yeah. Don't be annoying. I was so shocked that he'd say something like that. I wasn't trying to be mean at all. I'm still very sad about this, and we haven't talked much since then. And I don't get why he even said this, because I'm at a normal weight. I'm 5 feet 5 inches and 150 pounds. But his comment made me very self-conscious. His overall behavior has been very dismissive for some time now, and I don't know why. But anyways, was I wrong for saying that? Should I apologize again? If his comment made you self-conscious, how do you think he felt when you told him to eat more? Body shaming isn't just when a skinny person makes fun of a bigger person. It's okay for you to point out his weight, but when he suddenly turns the tables, you're the victim? Nah, you're Delulu and you're the idiot. I'm confused. You said he'd lost 10 kilograms, 22 pounds in a few weeks. So something like 4 to 7 pounds a week, and he's now skinnier, and you went straight to eat more? If this is correct, this is dramatic, rapid weight loss that indicates a serious medical issue. This is, dear, I've noticed that you've lost a lot of weight very quickly. I'm worried something is wrong. Have you checked in with your doctor? Are you feeling okay? Type of weight loss. You are the idiot for how you handled it. His response suggests to me that something is up and he's entirely unaware of it. I hope you guys are able to talk about this productively and that he's okay. When someone loses 10 kilos in weeks, it is a big indicator that something is very wrong in the body. It's not healthy, as weight shouldn't just go away like that. It isn't delusional or body shaming to point out a medical emergency to your partner. Screw it if it hurts their little feelings. It's unhealthy and must be pointed out and checked out ASAP. Sudden and unexplained weight loss is a common sign of cancer, for a singular example. Would you rather they just ignore that and potentially let it get worse? Absolutely not, the idiot. They should go to a medical professional as soon as possible. Hopefully it's nothing, but something could be very wrong. My ex-husband, Adam, has a brother, Larry. During our marriage, Larry was the nightmare brother-in-law, constantly boundary stomping, picking at people until they got upset, gaslighting them, etc. He grew to dislike me as I was one of the few to call him on his crap and tell him to stop. I kept telling Adam we should go low or no contact, and he refused. Larry then began crap-talking me to everyone. Adam never stood up for me, despite several conversations. Unfortunately, my daughter, then a young teen, now a mid-teen, ended up hearing a lot of it, and it really hurt her as we're close. I did my best to keep my kids from Larry, but Adam continued to bring my kids around them. Due to this and many other factors, we divorced. I tried to fight in court that Adam couldn't bring the kids around Larry and lost. One day, Larry went too far, crap-talking me in front of my daughter, and she went off on him, defending me and calling him out for his bullying behavior. She later told her dad it was her or Larry, and if he didn't pick her, she'd never go over to his house again. At the time, I had full custody as my kids were old enough to decide who to live with, and they picked me. They eventually compromised that my daughter wouldn't have to be around Larry again, but Adam would continue seeing him on his own. My daughter entered therapy shortly after and didn't see Larry after that. With the help of her therapist, she finally told me that when I wasn't around, Larry would bully her and instigate until she got upset. Then her father would ground her or make her apologize. Adam was then asked to join therapy and apologized. Adam and our daughter have since begun seeing a therapist to work on their relationship. Well, Larry died last week of a heart attack. Adam is naturally devastated. The funeral was yesterday. My daughter refused to go. I told my daughter she didn't have to go. My son, a teen, chose to, and I respected that. I did make sure my daughter was positive she didn't want to go, and she stood firm, taking several days to mull it over. We also discussed sometimes we do things we don't want to for those we care about, which also led to a great conversation on boundaries, and I ultimately respected her choice. If it's relevant, the funeral fell on my custody day. Adam's angry at me that I didn't force my daughter to go. I said that given the circumstances, she shouldn't have to go. Several members of Adam's family have reached out and told me that I had enabled my daughter to alienate Adam and Larry from each other and have further allowed her to be disrespectful by allowing her to miss the funeral. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. Your daughter learned how to stand up for herself. There's zero point in making her go to a funeral to pay her respects to someone who never respected her or you. Good job, Mom. And if Adam doesn't knock it off, I can foresee another funeral your daughter may skip. It sounds like your ex-brother-in-law only abused women and girls, and your ex was okay with that. Hasn't Adam learned anything? Despite all that therapy, etc., your daughter will end up going low or no contact with him and his family, and he'll be crying, wondering why. Honestly, the fact that they're all trying to attack both you and her for her making a choice based on our own needs just shows the very toxic lack of respect for personal boundaries